this thing flying.
How are you, sir? Great. Yourself? Good.
Be very brief.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know. I just go where I'm told. Yeah. I think it's an issue near and dear to people's hearts, I think. Yeah. I know your name.
Ugh.
I'm trying to eat my sandwich off camera.
There's a lot of cameras.
There sure are. There's one looking at me right now.
Did you see the planning board's recommendation?
The what? No.
Okay, so,
See, you found the rest of your soup.
Yes, sir.
Ben, Jack, tell me, how have you been?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Family's well?
Yes.
thanks.
Yes, indeed.
you know what my favorite Okay, you got yours, keeping notes, yes. You have one, okay, I guess she just gave me two. All right, I'm going to call to order a meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee on Tuesday, July 18th, 2017, and it is 7:04. And if the clerk would call the roll, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Alderwoman Marianne Woodsy-Gillian.
Present.
Alderman at Large Dan Moriarty is here. Alderman at Large Brian McCarthy.
Present.
Alderman Tom Lopez.
I'm here.
And Alderman Ben Clements.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And we also have Director Cummings with us and Mr. Tully. So before we get started, Alderman Lopez has told me he's going to need to leave early, so I don't, it's just a commitment he has, so I don't want everyone wondering where's he going as he runs out the door.
I was going to drop a smoke bomb and
So,
That would be effective.
this is our time in the agenda for public comment. There is a mic right there next to Director Cummings, and there are a couple mics over here if anyone would like to come up. And we don't have any formal sign-in, so feel free just to come up to one of the mics and state your name and address, please.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just would remind the audience, there's also a public comment at the end of the meeting if
Right.
people would like to see the presentation first.
Right.
Is it better now or later?
Or both.
My name is Mary Lou Blaisdell. I am a member of the Downtown Improvement Committee. I also own a business and property downtown. And I'm here basically tonight to speak in support of the Performing Arts Center, that the presentation I know you're going to hear tonight. We've had the opportunity on our committee to have heard it. I think it's an excellent plan, an excellent program. Our Downtown Improvement Committee funded part of this study. And we funded it because after doing a lot of study on what arts do for a community, we felt it was a program that was essential to the growth of Nashua and to the growth of downtown. We've got a lot of wonderful community art programs downtown. A lot of them have produced Broadway performers. We're very fortunate in the Peacock and in the Symphony and other performing entities, but we need to grow that, and we need to have a place for these people and others to perform. When we looked around at other communities that have performing arts centers, everybody around us does. Portsmouth has the Music Hall, Manchester has the Palace Theater, Concord has the Capitol Center. In Epping, they have the Leading Center. Derry has the Tupoleo Music Hall. In Lowell, there's the Songus Arena, the Lowell Performing Arts Center. Keene State College has an arts center and a performing arts center there. So all around us, these cities have seen the value of a performing arts center, and together with private and public monies, they have come together, they have built these centers. And by doing it, they've found that they create jobs, they attract investments, there's tax revenues, they stimulate local economies, and the research on that is excellent. They promote tourism, consumer purchases, and they enhance the quality of life for a community. And they also bring young professionals to an area and help those young professionals stay in an area. And I think all of those are issues that we all need to consider when we really look at this Performing Arts Center. I do realize the price tag on it is hefty, but I do believe that that price tag will benefit this entire city, and that we will see income in many areas come from the Performing Arts Center. If you have time, there's a great YouTube video from the National Endowment of the Arts on our town, and it talks about performing arts centers in downtowns. And I think it's something that Nashua needs, and I hope that the city Board of Aldermen and this committee will be in favor of moving that program forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Rich Lannon, and I'm also on the Downtown Improvement Committee. I also own a couple of mixed-use blocks in downtown Nashua, and I won't, to say a few things differently than Mary Lou did, but one of the things, like she mentioned, that our committee funded the original study, and I believe you all know, and for any of the public knows, I mean, when we funded that study, that wasn't to have a performing arts center in the Alex Shue building. That was to have a performance arts center, because Alex Shue was not going anywhere. They were downtown Nashua. So it was nothing to do with the building, the location. It was where this study was all about, can Nashua support anything? Can they support a 10-person theater or a 10,000 seat theater, and where's the best place? And so I've been very, very impressed with Duncan Webb, who has done the plan over the last, 2 or 3 years, however long it's been, gone through various scenarios, and it was somewhere probably halfway, 2/3 into that when the Alex Shue building came up, before they even started looking at locations. So how big Nashua can support, the size of the facility and the type of facility, again, that was predetermined. I think we definitely are not lucky that Alex Shue left. Obviously, I think we'd all agree with that. However, I think a lot of times, you can have an empty building sit there a long time, and I don't think we should have a performing arts center in that location because it's an empty building. I think it's because it's the right location. I think being on Main Street is vital, and I think the fact that it's near parking garages is also vital. So I think, his study proved of the size and that Nashua could use it, and I do think with everybody around us, I believe you all probably got a bunch of emails, probably from me, with different articles that have come up. Don't know if you had a chance to read them. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so. One of them that you got, I even have copies here if anybody wants them after. The headline is, "The new study puts arts economic impact at $120 million in just 4 New Hampshire communities." So the economic benefit in just 4. And these 4 communities are Greater Rochester, Portsmouth, Concord, and the Monadnock region. $120 million of economic benefit is huge. And it's sad that Nashua is not on this list yet. And I'm hoping it is, and hopefully folks can support the 4.5% period, and more importantly, take advantage of the fact that we have a location that I think will work well. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, and as Alderman McCarthy pointed out, there will be another time at the end of the meeting to make comment. So with that, the first item on our agenda this evening is just an update of what's going on with the Business and Industrial Development Authority, or BIDA, as some of you know it. And we have the chairman of the authority, Mr. Tully, here with us. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm happy to be here. My name is Jack Tully. I'm a resident of Nashua in Ward 9. I'd first like to commend the board members of the BIDA, many who, along with me, have served on this board since, I kind of call it since Streeter 1. It's been a long time. And much of that time we've been focused on Bridge Street, which, as you can see now, is phase 1 is well underway, which will ultimately end up in 152 market rate apartments. We have worked with Renaissance downtown for a long time in this project. They partnered with a group called SMC, who is their money behind them, if you will. Going on at the same time, a couple of years ago, the city did an RFP, and these engineers came in and looked at the traffic study. And through our efforts on this, we got moved up on the state highway plan, the 10-year plan, got accelerated. But that didn't result in any workable solution yet. So we're looking now at another set of engineers and try and get a plan that'll make that a better gateway into the city, that will work with traffic that backs up on the other side of the river into Hudson. We've listened to their concerns as well. Last fall and early winter, we had a strategic development committee, and we're trying to get a better vision of what we're going to do in the future. We've been working with the mayor. I should say I've met with the mayor over the past few months to further flesh out our priorities and our goals within the new administration. And I feel comfortable to report that we will be focusing on downtown. We continue to hear from merchants, from the other groups, that rehabilitating Main Street in the downtown is a high priority, and we understand that. The Mill Yard, although not directly downtown but in close proximity, is something we're also looking to revitalize and bring a positive economic impact there through new jobs or new housing stock, but ultimately a higher and better use of the land, which will ultimately have higher assessed values. Recently, we've been looking at the School Street parking lot, working in conjunction with the Office of Economic Development and the direction of the Board of Aldermen. The BIDA put out an RFP seeking development proposals for the School Street parking lot, and we've received one response this spring that is currently being evaluated. And we will continue to work with the various stakeholders to move this potential opportunity forward. And my final thoughts, I think I'd say publicly here tonight, is that we are concerned with the future, as many people are, of the Daniel Webster College. It's been a great asset to the city. It's 14+ acres, is dark right now. It's been a vital partner to the airport. It's actively being marketed right now. I don't know that we will have, or anybody in this room will have, any influence on it, but we're monitoring that to see if we can play a role in getting the city the best return on that campus. Be happy to take any questions, Madam Chairwoman.
Questions, comments? Alderman Moriarty?
Can you elaborate on the traffic study in Hudson at all? Is there a solution?
There is not yet, no. There is not yet. And we don't want to make it a worse situation. So we're looking at all the traffic patterns. We've got another set of engineers coming in. We're not sure if it's a roundabout with slip lanes. I'm not smart enough to answer that question right now, and we don't have enough research.
And I'm personally excited about the School Street parking lot RFP. You just gave us a teaser, anything more?
No, I can't talk about that without going into closed session just
Yeah,
yet.
okay.
So
But it's good news, hopefully.
we hope it's going to be good news, yes. It could be very exciting.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? Alderman Clements.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for your years of service for the city and everything that you do.
That's kind of you to say so.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else? No. Well, thank you. And I would just like to echo Alderman Clemens' thank you to you and all of the members of the board, because
It's a good board.
it's a good board, and I know you take your responsibility seriously.
Appreciate the tip of the cap.
And look for the best interests
Thank you.
of the city. So, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
I'll
so
go
much.
now.
Or you're welcome to stay, whichever you prefer.
Thank you.
But thanks so much. So the next item on our agenda is a communication from Director Cummings, the follow-on discussion relative to the Performing Arts Center. And do I have a motion to accept and place on file? Alderman Lopez?
Can I make a motion to accept and place on file the communication from Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development?
Okay, good night. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion is carried. Would we like to have discussion now or move on to our next communication? Alderman Lopez?
Does the discussion include the presentation?
Yes, but
We
I
should
didn't know if
probably
we
do that.
wanted to, okay, so Director Cummings, if you would like to take the floor and lead us through
Absolutely.
what you have.
Madam Chair, thank you. For the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development for the city, and the local City Hall staff are in charge of this project. This evening, I submitted a communication to you for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I wanted to continue the conversation. I felt it prudent to make sure that that I update the committee on some of the work that's been done over the last couple of months since this conversation originally started with the full Board of Aldermen back in early May. Then in addition to that, what I'm hoping to do is have this be a little bit more of a working group session where I can gain some direction from you and tease out a little bit in terms of what your thoughts are with some very particular issues. It will help inform me to move this project forward. I say that because, the feasibility study aspect of this particular project is really coming to a close. I have some recommendations, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about my thoughts about how to best move the project forward if there is an ambition. However, before we get there, I wanted to take this opportunity more for the viewing audience at home to give a quick status update or a little background information on the Performing Arts Center as they may be just joining the conversation this evening. And ultimately, what I'm hoping to do is focus on the memo and communication that was submitted to you. So with that being said, just very quickly, where we are in terms of the progress. We started this initiative back in 2015 with the concept that was in the summer and fall, and then there was a feasibility study broken out into 2 phases, which we are currently concluded, the phase 2, which there was some recommendations predicated off of some due diligence being done, which I'll get to in a few moments. Ultimately, with a request for a bond authorization should we want to move forward with a Performing Arts Center in the downtown. Quickly, I'm just going to revisit and highlight the two big elements that were done in the two various phases. First was the assessment. So there wasn't a market analysis done where there was the supply looked at, the demand was looked at, the utilization of performing arts centers was all looked at within the marketplace. It basically showed that there was an opportunity for a performing arts center. Although we do have other performing arts center spaces in our market, there is demand for diverse space that could accommodate differing type of performances and cultural opportunities. So the conclusion basically talked about a demand for 500 to 700 type seats that would help benefit the downtown with some positive economic impact. There was essentially a recommendation made that we pursue 500 to 700 seat multi-purpose facility in the downtown area, which ultimately, hopefully, would come to be known as an arts and cultural district, something that supported that type of cluster of uses. Moving on from there, we had phase two. The phase two feasibility study really focused on the physical planning and then the pro forma or the operations of the potential site. Just by way of background, this is really where I joined the conversation. Just as a reminder, I came to the city after actually phase one was already concluded. So this is really where I played a more intimate role. So with that being said, with our consultants, both the Performing Arts Center consultant Duncan Webb and our architect Scott Aquilina from Bruner Cott, we essentially, based on feedback and work that was done during phase one, predicated some criteria that we needed to assess Performing Arts Center space off of. The big ones were access to parking, visibility to Main Street, proximity to retail, so there was positive economics spin-off, and then an adequate footprint to accommodate 500 to 700 seat type facility. With that being said, focusing in the downtown area, we developed a short list of potential sites that may be able to accommodate that type of operation. As you can see, we looked at the Spring Street, the Main Street, the Court Street, the Water Street, and the Indian Head Bank building all on Main Street to assess how best to move forward. Then there was a conversation of what type of Performing Arts Center space we would like, working with a working group of various stakeholders, all in the Performing Arts Center realm or in the downtown realm. We heard from various folks as to what their vision would be, and understanding what that may be. We basically understood what we could produce from an operation standpoint, making sure it's multi-purpose, making sure it accommodated the differing type of arts, including visual arts, making sure that it was event space as well that could be programmed, and making sure it was something that could be a positive economic benefit to the merchants in the downtown. Ultimately, what the consultants felt comfortable recommending to the Board of Aldermen was a site on Main Street. I will note that I am going to move away from referring to it as the Alex Shoe Building. I'm going to start referring to it as 201 Main Street. And I say that because Alex Shoes is a wonderful business here in town, and I don't want to necessarily associate this building anymore with that, although I do know that colloquially we do reference this building as such. So with that being said, we really focused on 201 Main Street because of it hit all the marks. There was great proximity to parking, as some of you may or may not know. There's structured parking in very close proximity. It is right on Main Street. Some people refer to this as the 50-yard line. And so therefore it can accommodate a lot of what we were looking for, and it had the square footage to accommodate the seating and the multi-purpose type nature that we would be looking for event space. So it was definitely something that rose to the top. And so you can see some differing type of visuals here that give you an idea of what we were looking at. And then the architect outlined a potential program. This is all concept and conceptual in nature, but it basically outlines performance space of about 7,000 square feet on the second floor. First floor would be still active with some sort of retail type space, and then you have the back of the house and other supporting amenities in and around that 30,000 square foot structure. Here's another view of the potential capacity where you can see that we can accommodate the various type of seating, whether it's standing, table, or tiered seating. Again, this is all conceptual and layout. We could potentially fit more, but until you actually get into the schematic design, this was the conservative recommendation being made. What would we liken it to? Talking to the differing performing consultants, they had a particular theater in Brooklyn, which I've heard a lot of comments about the Brooklyn Bridge being over Main Street, and I want to clarify for the record, we are no longer considering bringing the Brooklyn Bridge to Nashua. But with that being said, this theater was the best apples-to-apples type comparison that could be given to help the community have a comfort level to move forward. So what you do see in front of you is actually a theater that's in Brooklyn, both the exterior and interior of the building. So ultimately, what we would be looking at for a scope is a 30,000 square foot building on 2 floors to support a theater. Capital budget would be $15.5 million. The operating budget would run around $1 million. Of that, earned revenue would be approximately $700,000. Contributed revenue from various different sources would be approximately $300,000. This operating model would still need to be decided upon. This was just a recommendation made by our consultants. I wanted to include this slide basically to show what is still necessary to be able to move forward. If there was such a desire, there's a couple major elements, including the planning and the design, including the planning of the operations, and then including the fundraising that would go along with this particular project. As I have not mentioned yet, a recommendation and the consensus of the working group was that an endowment be capitalized that would help offset the operation. There was a sentiment expressed that the city would have an interest potentially in helping with the execution of the capital project, but really the theater in and of itself moving forward from an operational standpoint would need to be self-sustaining. To do that, working with our consultants, they recommended we capitalize an endowment fund of approximately $4 million, which would contribute to some of that income that was mentioned a little bit ago. So again, an initiative that should occur early on is the capital campaign to help us reach that 4 million target goal, and that would help give the city a comfort level to move forward. So why are we doing this? You know, I took this slide and I put it in here to just, you know, in a very elementary way explain about what a positive economic impact could be for Main Street. This is my own, you know, back of the envelope type of calculation. You know, we had the professional consultants come in and give us both direct, indirect, induced type of economic benefits. I wanted to really just drill down into a very concise potential case study that we could really use and hold up. So what I'm essentially outlining here is, you know, if we look at 2 shows over a year, which is 52 weeks, we're looking at 104 performances in a year. With a venue that is 700 seats, and remind you, we would still need to design that, and only achieving an 80% occupancy, which is the standard for these types of programs, you'd be looking at 560 attendees. Now, out of those 560 attendees, if only half of them, or 280, actually go out onto Main Street and spend, on average, $30 within that year, within that evening, you'd be looking at, on any typical night, $8,000 or almost $10,000 in spend. Take that over a year, and you're looking at $873,000, or just under $1 million. Remind you, that's only if there's 2 shows in a week. If you bump that up to even 3 shows, you'd be pushing over $1 million as direct spend right onto Main Street. So I want to point that out to you as to a very simplified version of what we would be doing for our Main Street corridor. So with that being said, next steps that were outlined in the presentation to the Special Board of Aldermen that occurred in early May was to pursue a $15.5 million bond, understanding that an endowment would need to be done at the exact same time. I would also illustrate that some immediate issues are necessary, and some of the conversation I would like to have here this evening is direction from you all as to whether we should be formulating a steering committee and what that would actually look like. Understanding whether we want to move forward with a bond request. My recommendation to you this evening is that we submit a bond for the August Board of Aldermen meeting for $15.5 million. And then in conjunction with all that, we would need to move forward with an option to secure 201 Main Street. And if there is an ambition to move forward with professional consultants moving forward, a term I'm using is seed capital, we would need to capitalize or appropriate some sort of funding for that, because we don't have any right now. We don't necessarily need to do that, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that right now we do not have any professional consultants retained on this project at this point in time. So that was a very quick presentation to outline where we are today. This evening, I was really looking to focus on the communication that I submitted to you, which essentially outlines the work that has occurred within my office that I have done over the last month or two. If you recall, and I'm not going to read this communication to you, but I'm just going to pick out some sentences and some thoughts and highlight them for you right now. Over the last couple of months, if you recall, there was some questions centering around debt service and whether the city could accommodate a $15.5 million bond. Since that original conversation, the Board of Aldermen has been briefed on our debt service. And depending on the financing plan and depending on the priorities that the community wants to execute on, it was clear that the city could accommodate a $15.5 million bond, understanding that the total of bond wouldn't be absorbed right away. It would probably be absorbed over a few years. So you'd be looking at a $300,000-ish type of installment type payment, at least on the onset, and that would be on a fixed account of approximately $16.5 million that you see right now before you in the FY18 budget. Very early on, I made clear that I thought there was opportunities that we would be able to reduce that $15.5 million bond. I would not want us to authorize anything less than the $15.5 million, because I can't guarantee you we would be able to achieve some of these alternative funding sources. But there are grants and tax credits available to us, which I've had conversations with either brokers, consultants, or actually the organizations that fund these types of creative financing tools, and they've all expressed a strong interest and sentiment in partnering with the city. They want the city to go first and to authorize a bond. That was very clear to me in the various conversations, but they would be willing to do something. So with that being said, I conservatively sketched out that I thought there was an opportunity to reduce the cost to approximately $12 million when all said and done. There's other examples of way we can, try to be creative, and I defer to the board and to the administration as to if they want to ever pursue some of these opportunities. But the bottom line is we do have alternative revenue coming into the city that's not on the property tax base of Nashua residents. And so whether we look at taking some of the proceeds from the refinancing of the clock tower, or whether we look at CDBG funding, or whatever the case may be, whether we look at maybe taking some of tax property and selling it, we could, again, generate a pretty sizable amount of money that we can contribute to this project, which would, again, offset the debt. So just in conclusion, I had noted where the 15.5 million will come from. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. I had noticed in preparation over the last few months that I may not have actually spelled out exactly how the money would be spent. So construction costs per our consultants came in at about $11.5 million. AE&L, which is referred to as architecture, engineering, and legal, was pegged at about $1 million. Theater equipment was also budgeted at just under $1 million. FF&E allowance was approximately $100,000. For those of you who don't know what FF&E stands for, that's for fixture, furnitures, and equipment. And then the land acquisition would be $2 million. So 201 Main Street right now is a building that is on Main Street that we've had very positive conversations with the owner. He is interested in entering into an option where the city would buy the building for $2 million, predicated on a $36,000 payment over 6 months, or $6,000 a month, with an option to extend that beyond 6 months for a year, to be credited to the purchase price. So those are my formal remarks that I wanted to give you today, Madam Chair. I ultimately was hoping to enter into more of a dialogue and working group type session to answer any questions that may arise, or to gain some answers for some questions that I may have.
Okay, thank you. So questions, comments? Alderman Lopez and then Alderman McCarthy.
Just as a comment, I know there may be different categories of CDBG, or maybe more larger program than I'm aware of, but my experience with CDBG through the Board of Aldermen has been, that's a program where nonprofit organizations apply through the city for CDBG money, and then we have had a very difficult time choosing which ones, to help. Sometimes we have to make the choice between the kitchen for the shelter for domestic violence victims and the floor of the Nashua Children's Home. So that's already a difficult decision to make, and that's also one where HUD didn't fully fund it this year, and they made us scale it back yet again. So I would really like to see other thinking involved, rather than having our Performing Arts Center competing with much smaller initiatives that have no other way of generating that kind of a revenue. With the support of the Downtown Improvement Committee, they were saying that they funded the initial study. I would want to see if they have any additional budget or funding money instead of CDBG, because what funds the Downtown Improvement Committee are all the people that are parking and paying parking revenue. And this is something that'll bring more people in, bring more attraction to the downtown area. So I kind of think that is a legitimate source to be considering too.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
So a couple points. One, Downtown Improvement Committee playing a role in the future, I absolutely think that is necessary. I'd remind you, though, that their budget is relatively small compared to this type of appropriation or conversation that we're having today. But should there be an opportunity for them to step up, I think that they would be willing and interested in having that conversation. Relative to CDBG, I actually specifically put this, this in front of you because I'm newer to Nashua, right? And so I'm coming here, and this type of project actually is what most communities use their CDBG funds for. So I wanted to actually have that conversation with you, make you aware of that. Whether you choose actually to pursue that, I defer to the business of the Board of Aldermen, and I'll work with whatever direction you give me. I would just I just wanted to make sure I did my job in terms of outlining what HUD and other agencies have outlined as best practices. And this type of use would be a best practice. And why do I say that? Because you're leveraging money that isn't coming in from your community, so it's essentially new wealth, new dollars, and you're doing it to actually spur positive positive economic impact. So whether you use it for this program, or whether you use it as to offer an incentive onto possibly the development of the School Street parking lot, what you're doing is you're leveraging new wealth for the benefit of Nashua. So that's all I really have to say for that, but I did want to actually, make my points on that issue.
Alderman McCarthy, and then Alderman
Yeah.
Clements. I'm sorry.
First, I would comment on CDBG. It wasn't always that way. It's only in recent years that we have given all of it to nonprofits. I don't actually think that's what it was intended for when the grant program was created. We used to use it for things like renovating the Court Street Theater,
Right.
doing work on the Hunt Building, and a number of things that had economic benefit by increasing the city's infrastructure.
Right.
So while it's a delicate balance, I think it's a discussion that needs to be had at the time, because as Director Cummings points out, a prosperous community has less problems than one that doesn't have as much money. And the problems that we try to solve with the nonprofits are easier to solve if we have a prosperous community to support things like charitable giving. I know that's tough in New Hampshire, because even in the prosperous communities, there isn't as much giving as there ought to be. But I think those are things that, in general, a rising tide floats all boats. So, question I had is, there are some residences in that building, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And there is the first floor. Would we retain the tenants that are there, and what do we think the revenue potential is between that and the leasing of the first floor? Because it seems to me that goes directly towards offsetting the operating budget.
It absolutely could, and that was a thought process. I would not want to commit to a specific number today, but to give you a ballpark, if we look at approximately 10,000 square feet and plug it at about $15, you'd be looking at potential revenue off of just the first floor, call it retail space, of approximately $150,000. That could go towards the operating costs. That is a thought process that has been built into the operational model. I would suggest to you that the 4 units that are in the building was not built into the operational model, because it wasn't clear whether they would stay or go. We would still need to have that conversation.
Follow? Alderman Clements?
Thank you. I want to echo what Alderman Lopez said in regards to CDBG. I know that Nashua does things a little bit differently than most communities when it comes to that, but I think we do it well, and I think there's a reason that we do it, and that's because we live in a city and a state that doesn't have a lot of resources when it comes to nonprofits, and they play an important role in our city, and I think that by funding a lot of their requests through CDBG, that allows the community to have more money to spend on projects such as the theater or other nonprofits that are important. So one hand washes the other in the end, but I think there's a little bit more oversight when it comes through City Hall, and I think it's been working for a number of years, and I do believe that that should stay that way. With that being said, I think that one of the most important things that the city, as a city, can do is get behind this with in raising an endowment. I think that while we can build a beautiful theater, operating one is another conversation, and it's one that, you know, we don't want to see an empty theater there because we don't have the funds to operate it. So, you know, I think one of the things that, and what I hope is that people in the city are looking for direction from the Board of Aldermen to say, okay, if we're going to fundraise for this, then you need to put up the money to build it. And I certainly would hope that a bonding resolution would come through by the next Board of Aldermen meeting, so that we can have this discussion about whether or not this makes sense, have a vote on it, and have it be settled by September, so that, you know, folks can get together, or we can have an organization or something, you know, some kind of direction to move towards a goal to get that endowment in place. Because I really think that that's a critical piece that is going to be necessary. And it's not going to be an easy goal to achieve. But I think if this is something that the city really wants, I think we can come together and we can raise that capital. So those are just my thoughts.
Thank you. Director Cummings, and then Alderman Lopez, just for clarification for people who may not have been following the conversation that's occurred over the past few months, we're talking about a bond for the building and then the endowment to support operation, but the city not operating it, actually going out and looking for someone to come in and operate it. So we would not actually be taking care of the day-to-day operation. And I believe
That's correct.
In an earlier discussion, when we had the Phase 2 talk with the Board of Aldermen, it was Spectrum?
Yes, spectacle management.
Yes, right.
So if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Not only during that conversation with the working group during the Phase 2 of this study, but even since then, I've been in active conversations with Spectacle Management. They are one source that the city could turn to as a potential vendor. I don't want to get too much ahead of myself. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself or too far out in front. I think this is a conversation that I would like to have with the steering committee. If it's the pleasure of the committee to go in that direction, it would be my recommendation that we put it out to a third-party operator and hold that third-party operator accountable. Originally, when I first started hearing of this concept, I was concerned that we wouldn't actually have a demand or a market. But today I can tell you that I've heard from 2 or 3 operators who've asked me if we would be putting an RFP out. I jokingly said, well, we're not there yet. We first have to get funding for the building. So I can report to you today that there would be a third-party operator in place if that was the desire or ambition.
Okay, so I just wanted it clarified that the endowment would not be to support the city operating it, but as you stated, a third party coming in and operating. Alderman Lopez.
I just wanted to comment that I think a rising tide will definitely float all boats, but at the same time, we shouldn't necessarily be looking at the people who have the least as to where to get that from. I think there's plenty of solutions here that are much larger fish, much larger possible resources. My comment was mostly to compare what Downtown Improvement Committee had with what CDBG might have, and I see value in using money that is already being generated and being put aside for downtown improvement over taking money from nonprofits that we do. Whether we did it differently in the past, I mean, we did a lot of different things differently in the past. The Court Street Theater was set up differently in the past. We can point at all kinds of projects and how well they went, but my opinion is we should be structuring this from the ground in a way that doesn't affect programs that are important to the city that already exist. I would also say there's a number of projects that are kind of on the drawing board right now, which could be expensive in their own right. And we should concentrate on doing a few things well and not everything that we want to do at the same time. And I think this is one of the things we need to concentrate on to give it the best chance of success. Like, if we really came together on this and showed, organizational leadership and encouraged the community, rather than spreading our attention out over a dozen or so different development projects, we could make this work. We could signal to the art community that we're serious, that we're giving them top priority instead of just kind of going through the motions. So I just want to be clear that we should be approaching this not from a perspective of how can we make this work without really going out of our way to make it work. This should be a citywide effort that's taken very seriously.
Alderman Clements, and then Director Cummings.
Thank you. Alderman Lopez, I think that the Downtown Improvement Committee would definitely be involved in the theater. I mean, that group has, which I've been a part of since its inception in 2012, has been supportive of this idea since then, really. And, the fact that we funded the first phase of the concept, I think, is testament to that. Generally speaking, the city generates for the Downtown Improvement Committee, by the parking revenue, we get about $100,000, give or take, a year. And that money goes towards various things, little improvements downtown. I think a lot of the pay and displays were paid with that. A lot of the, there are other things, but the goal is that while we want to make sure that we're contributing, like everything else, there's a broader goal. And so the theater would obviously become part of that, but I think that you can't ignore the rest of it either. And so, like with everything else, like with CDBG, there's a balance. And so I would just caution that, there's not this endless amount of money there, and in fact, there's more money coming from CDBG. I would rather see the city find through, a fundraising through an endowment or a third party, or maybe it's the steering committee's goal to find new sources of revenue to really get this going and to get everybody on board. And the people that are going to come together on this are going to be board members of various nonprofits, people in the Downtown Improvement Committee, and people from probably not only just Nashua, but from all over the region who want to see Nashua succeed and want to see Nashua have a grander downtown and a place that people want to come to. So I think that the goal should be that, but I think in order for that to happen, we need to be discussing the bond, because I don't think that putting together a steering committee or having anybody go out there and do any significant fundraising is worthwhile until the city puts its mark on it by saying, yes, this is something that we're going to build, and it is something that we support, and we're going to move forward on it. At that point, then we should put together the steering committee, then we should start the fundraising for the endowment.
Alderman McCarthy and then Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, I just want to make sure the committee understands there will actually be a bonding resolution in front of us in August, I believe, for a number of infrastructure projects that finance people are trying to work out a multi-year schedule for how the bond payments will go so that they don't bust the budget. But I think we're going to see something that takes care of several needs, and this will be this is certainly the most important one for me. So I think we'll see something that hopefully will pass and give us a long-term infrastructure plan. And I think I was speaking to Director Cummings before about how we can go about getting an option on the building to go along with that so that we'll have the two important pieces in place. Frankly, I don't think there's any risk in buying the building as the city anyway. It's, likely the most attractive piece of real estate, of retail real estate in downtown, so at the very worst, we could sell it at a profit someday. But, we should acquire it, I think, with all due haste as soon as we, if we pass a bond resolution in the fall, we would certainly do that as one of the first steps.
Alderman Lopez?
So I agree with what Alderman Clements was saying about, this is very likely going to include a bonding process, because I see no formula here without doing that. I just want to make sure that we are making a legitimate effort to bring the bond down as much as we can within our own means, if we're going to say that we're doing that. If for the argument is going to be like, it's impossible, we just need a bond at all, then that's the argument. But if the argument is we can bring it down to around $13 million using the following strategies, I just don't want to include something that will hurt the city a lot more because we removed it from people who needed it, versus something that it's not going to make a big difference in the overall calculus. I'd just rather see more creativity in trying to find private donors. That the steering committee is a good idea, but I keep coming back to the Downtown Improvement Committee because they're invested in downtown, they're downtown's leaders, and I think any fundraising effort or any strategy in which this is sustainable is going to need to include people who are very invested and very engaged. And whether that means their budget or just their leadership, that was my point. I was comparing the two as, this is where we might be looking for support, but I'm looking a little bit beyond just the numbers and saying we need to figure out how to get people invested from the ground up in this project and make sure that we have a committee that is a steward. We can contract a third party to manage it, but in the past, when we've had other people manage our buildings, it hasn't worked so great if they weren't that particularly invested in it. So there needs to be oversight of people who are not going to let this slide, not going to let this decay, not going to let weeds grow. It has to be started by people who are passionate about it and then maintained by them later.
Director Cummings?
So just a couple points. One, I want to be clear. I, within my purview, will do everything I can to try to bring down the bond authorization as much as possible, or the debt, I should say, from that 15.5 request. I can't tell you today definitively what that would be. I do believe that whether we pursue new market tax credits or any other type of credit, that will help bring down the capital costs. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. Everything that I would be focused on today in terms of the $15.5 million, the strategies to reduce that would not have anything to do with their capitalization of the endowment. That would be a separate effort. I wouldn't want folks to double count the credits towards the capital and then also think it's going to capitalize an endowment fund. But I do want to make sure that that's clear. And then also just I put some of these strategies into the memo more than anything because, I'm a very detailed person and I get down into the granular, but really we need to see the forest through the trees at this point. And, we're a $250 million operation all in, and, whether we, piece this together in some way, the bottom line of the message I'm trying to get across to this body is that we can afford this type of capital project at this time, and I wouldn't want to lose focus on that. In terms of the Downtown Improvement Committee, I think you have no better steward of this type of project. They've been invested from the very beginning, and all the conversations I've had with them have said that they want to be involved moving forward.
Alderman Lopez, I know you need to leave.
Yeah,
Alderman
that's why I
McCarthy.
just wanted to excuse myself. And I will review the footage of this and then definitely be involved in the Alderman meeting.
Okay, thanks. Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, with regard to lowering the construction bond, if there are things like tax credits or grants that can get that are applicable only to construction, I'd like to see us do the math. With regard to community contributions see those go to the endowment. The difference between a $14 and a $15 million bond to the city is like $75,000 a year. The difference between $700,000 in revenue and $1 million in revenue is the difference between having and not having a program in the building that we just built. So I'm much more concerned when I look at it, and when I look at the operating history of performing arts venues here and in the area, with making sure that the annual operating plan is sustainable, than I am worried about us paying for the building.
Alderman Clements, and then Alderman Moriarty.
Just briefly, got a reminder to bring this up, so I apologize, but it's was noted that, and I'm not sure if it's included in the plans or if that was in the quote, is a screen, like a movie screen, included in the,
I don't know, I would have to double check, but I think we could figure that out, I don't know.
The only reason that I ask is because it's been brought up in the community a lot as something that's wanted in this project, but that hasn't been seen. So I just throw that out there as as something that people have been contacting me about.
Director Cummings.
Although I can't speak to whether that specific piece of equipment is included in the quote. In fact, I don't think we've gotten to that level of design yet that I could represent to you tonight that it's been included. I can tell you that the original concept and everything that has been discussed has been preliminary designed to be able to entertain a theater type concept in this space. It will be laid out that way. That is one of the uses that our consultants thought of when they were conceiving of this.
Thank you.
Alderman Moriarty.
Thank you,
sorry.
Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Questions for Director Cummings. Did your financial estimates include using the parking fees that are currently going to downtown improvements to be dedicated to the?
For which, to answer your question, no, but there's a big difference between capital and operational. So no, that has not been included.
No to both.
Yes, that has not been included thus far.
So if we look at the communication we received, the immediate next step Director Cummings has presented us with is looking at securing the option for the building. Director Cummings?
I'm sorry, if I could just back you up a little bit, I just want to make sure it's the pleasure of the committee that we somehow formalize a steering committee. So a little bit before the immediate next step, I talk about general next steps. If it's the pleasure of the committee, my recommendation is the Downtown Improvement Committee continue on as stewards of this project. Nothing has ever been formalized to that. I don't want to be as bold to move in that direction without actually having some sort of understanding from you all. But if that is, something that the group is amenable to, then I would suggest either some sort of resolution would come forward from my office to you to that effect, or you need to give me some other type of direction as to what you'd like to do.
Alderman Clements?
Well, I think that there are members on the Downtown Improvement Committee that should be on the steering committee for this. I think there are other members of the community that should also be included on a steering committee. And so my recommendation would be to formalize a committee, or to start thinking about how we want a committee established, but I wouldn't move on it until we have until we voted on the bond. Let's get the bond passed and then we'll form a committee, because doing so ahead of time is a non-guarantee that anything's, if it dies 9-6, then, if we only get 9 votes on the bond, this conversation will be moot.
Director Cummings?
So my preliminary plan was actually to do it in conjunction, so I was going to suggest that I would file a make a recommendation to the mayor, to file a resolution, at the August meeting, just so we're not losing any type of momentum.
Alderman McCarthy and Alderman Clements.
I tend to agree with Alderman Clements. I think it requires a committee that will be formed from whole cloth. I think we ought to have a proposal for what that should look like. I suspect ultimately a resolution of the board is required to create that, and we ought to start investigating that, but I think creating a committee coincident with or shortly after the bond is passed is probably the right idea.
Okay.
And I would just agree with Alderman Clements in terms of the makeup of that committee. I think that we do want that larger community support, and I think certainly the Downtown Improvement Committee, we know is very invested in this project, but we also have members of the arts community and just other people within the community because of their interest in theater or downtown or just economic development in the city who would also be interested in participating. And I think the greater diversity we have on that committee, the better off we may be in terms of reaching out, doing a grassroots reach out. Yes, Alderman Clements.
Yeah, we want somebody that knows how to fundraise on that committee. So if you're out there, let us know.
So other thoughts?
So again, I'm not sure what the pleasure of the committee may be. I would suggest that we can either do it through the bond or through the escrow process, but we may need a slight appropriation moving forward to retain some additional consultants, particularly, and we can get into this maybe after the bond authorization goes through, but it's something I want to make sure this committee is aware of. And then ultimately, I wanted to make sure that the committee understood and was aware of the fact that there is a transfer actually pending before the board that is in the Budget Review Committee, where we're looking to take out a general contingency transfer it into the office of the mayor, $36,000, with the understanding that it will be used for the pursuit of securing 201 Main Street through an option to purchase agreement. That conversation is scheduled to occur with the Budget Review Committee next Monday night. I invite you all to attend if you have nothing else going on. I would welcome your participation. But otherwise, that concludes my real goals for this evening in terms of direction that I needed to gain from you. More to the point, I just thought it was appropriate to continue a public dialogue on this very important project, and I think we achieved that objective tonight, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts from members of the committee? Thank you. And just for the record, I thought the mayor had left prior to our meeting starting. I didn't see him the way he was sitting. I didn't see him behind other people. So if we could just note the mayor was here for a portion of the meeting. Our other communication was placed on the desk this evening from Roger Houston regarding alternative dwelling units. And so I need just a motion to suspend the rules. Alderman Clements?
Move to suspend the rules to accept the communication from Roger Houston, which was placed on our desk this evening.
Okay. And also to allow for this introduction. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? And again, that's in reference to 017-036. And if you remember, this went to the city planning board, and they had their meeting on July 13th. And at that time, they made a favorable recommendation, but their recommendation was based on reverting 190-32B5 to the original language, which stated the owner of the property must occupy either the primary or accessory dwelling unit as the owner's principal place of residence. And with that change, they were in support. And their rationale was that they felt it was important to look at the impact of this in terms of how it would impact the value of properties in the neighborhood. And so that's why we're looking at, again, having at least one of those units being occupied by the primary owner, being their principal place of residence. So any comments, questions, discussion of this? When we had tabled this, do we want to?
Are we up to old business or?
Well, we have no unfinished and no new business, so yes.
Move to take our 01736 from the table.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so discussion. Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, I would move in paragraph 190-32B5 to strike for a period of at least 5 years following the granting of the certificate of occupancy for the accessory dwelling unit.
Okay. So you've heard that motion. Discussion? Alderman Moriarty?
I can only guess that they wanted to do that because they have no way to enforce something that happens in the future?
Quite the opposite.
Their response to it is reasonably brief. And the minutes from the meeting where they approved it are not fully done yet, but I believe that their intent was this can convert single-family neighborhoods into duplex neighborhoods where both properties are both
Correct.
parts of the
Okay.
property are rented.
So so it means that there's no time limit. They're implying that the owner has to live there forever.
Correct.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Alderman Clements?
Thank you. Number one, I think the fear expressed by the planning board is unfounded. Reason being is that if we put into effect a period of 5 years that after a granting of certificate of occupancy for dwelling, that means that for a period of 5 years after, basically after the construction is done of that property, you have to live there. So if you're building a second unit to have it for as an in-law apartment, or your children are moving in there, or whatever the reason might be, you have to be an owner occupied there for 5 years. So it's a decision that, you know, you have to think about for the future. Secondly, what I fear happening is you're going to have properties that, where this is done, they get sold, and now we don't know that they're two-family properties until something bad happens, because, you know, people haven't maintained them, or they're not up to code for whatever reason, there's a fire, and we didn't even know that it was a two-family property. If they are maintained as two-family properties the way that the amendment had wanted it to be, then you will have the code enforcement department knowing about that because it has a certificate of occupancy. The other issue that I have with changing this back is that it is unduly unfair to a person who might inherit a home such as this. If you know, if you were, or a family was to inherit a home, a two-family home, that, let's say, at some point, the second unit was being rented out, and the primary occupant passed away, and the home was transferred ownership to the children or whoever. Now you're in a situation where the city is forcing the hand of the new owner by not only removing the family that's renting from the unit, but also by having them tear down the unit, in essence, rendering the house not uninhabitable, but certainly not as worth as much money as it was prior to. And it creates a messy situation that I see as an unenforceable code. You cannot force people, or you cannot have the city go around with a series of properties and constantly keep track of what's being, which of the properties that are being sold. What are we going to do? Send the code enforcement down to the building at the time of the sale and make sure that in order for the sale to go through, that the two units are gone if the property isn't going to be inhabited by the person buying it? It's just, it's insane. And it's insane to think that this is a good piece of governance. The reason that the state of New Hampshire passed this bill was to make it easy for people to put an accessory dwelling unit in their home. The city of Nashua is then turning around, with the way that this is worded, the city of Nashua is then turning around and saying, well, we're going to make it as impossible for you to do that as we can. So I just don't think that this is a very good thing for us to do. I think that the compromise that we came up with was just that. It was a compromise. I think that it was a better solution to the problem, and I put problem in quotations because I don't think it is one. But it was a better solution because at least what it prevented was, and this is what I thought the planning board's issue was that at least it prevented people from buying properties and simply converting them into two families, because that wouldn't happen, because you would have to live there for 5 years, for the initial 5 years, in order for you to convert something to a two-family that was a one-family. That is something that is enforceable, because we grant the certificate of occupancy, and that is for a 5-year period. That's something that we can track. 20 years down the line, I just think it's too much.
Alderman McCarthy.
Well, a couple of things. I personally, I don't much care which way this amendment goes. I want to get we need to get the piece of legislation in place one way or another. It doesn't change the enforcement aspect at all. There's still a certificate of occupancy. We will know that the property's been converted because we will receive a deed covenant and the application fee to do that. So we can clearly tell which properties have dwelling units in. Now, the question that Alderman Clements brings up about a house that's inherited is an interesting one because it's there all the time. Even in our amended language, if you pass away a month after having added the dwelling unit, and the house passes on to your children who are not residents of the house, presumably have a house somewhere else, perhaps not even in the state, the property is immediately in non-compliance. It has a tenant, but it doesn't have an owner-occupant. So I think there's a hole there in the overall state legislation, and I mean the state specifically said you can require owner occupancy, and they never addressed that issue of how that gets resolved. So I guess all I want to do is vote on the amendment, send the legislation and get it in place, and then follow up with the legal department on that issue, one way or the other. So I don't know whether I'm actually going to vote for my amendment or not. I want to make sure that we record a vote on the planning board's recommendation before we send it back to the board.
Okay, other thoughts, comments? Alderman Moriarty?
I don't mind if it makes it more difficult to take advantage of added flexibility. I mean, the ordinance of this whole accessory dwelling unit makes it easier for somebody to do something. And if sometime down the road, their kids inherit some wealth, and they have a little bit of a challenge involved with accepting money, I have sympathies for them. I don't think that's a big problem. They'll deal with it somehow. They'll be happy to deal with that problem if you were to inherit a bunch of wealth. So I'm going to go ahead and vote for the amendment.
Alderman Clements?
So much for live free and die, or live free or die.
You may have been closer the first time.
That's true, too.
So, do we have a motion?
Well, we had a motion, right?
Oh, would you reread it, please? Alderman McCarthy's
Oh.
motion.
I mean, the motion was to strike in 19032B5, everything following for a period of at least.
At least 5 years, okay. So, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so Alderman McCarthy.
Move to recommend final passage as amended.
Okay, so you've heard the motion, final passage as amended. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So we will recommend final passage as amended. Okay. The other piece of business that was tabled is regarding the historic district, and we've gotten nothing back yet regarding
I had sent the draft amendments off to legal, and I got a note back from Dory in the last day or two that said they were okay, but they haven't had a chance to codify them in ordinance format yet, so those will be coming at some point in the near future.
Okay, so, any other discussion? Comments from the public? Please come up and take a mic, and your name and address, please, for the record.
So my name is Paul Shea, and I live at 102 Toll Street. I am the executive director for Great American Downtown. Just wanted to offer a few comments about the Performing Arts Center conversation. For Great American Downtown's purposes, it's really not our place to take a position on this, but to invite people to be a part of the conversation and to keep them in the loop as things develop. I just want to take a moment to comment that the process that this has been going through over the past couple of years has been incredibly thorough, and I really appreciate that. And I'm glad that Tim has just walked in, because I wanted to commend Tim and his staff for all the work that they have done with public engagement. We have had so many folks from various community theater groups and arts groups and performing arts venues as part of this conversation as things developed. So they've just been doing some tremendous work to have a very thorough conversation, and I just wanted to offer comments of appreciation on that. The general sentiment that you know, kind of in our outreach to the public that we've received regarding downtown in general is that people, by an overwhelming margin, after receiving feedback from a little over 300 people on any number of things that they might like to see downtown, by a significant margin, indoor and outdoor music programming stands out at the top of the list. Thank you all for your attention to this. Thank you to Tim and his staff and the Board of Aldermen and Downtown Improvement Committee for all the energy that has gone into this. Having that community input as part of the process, I think makes it a very genuine conversation, and I believe that the outcome will reflect that. So thank you all for your work.
Anyone else?
My name is Matt Kaiser. I live at 35 Digital Drive in Nashua. And I came here, I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak in favor of the Performing Arts Center as a member of the performing arts community as well as the visual arts community. I'm glad Tim came back because I wanted to just thank him for this initiative. I moved to Nashua 4 years ago and started performing in Nashua 4 years ago. It's a small performing arts community. There's not a lot of theater groups in the community, but the ones that are there are great. So much so that even though I can commute up to an hour away for work, when it came to my wife and I finding a house, we decided to purchase a house right in the north end of Nashua, which we're doing this year because we believe in what this community can become. She's a visual artist, she's an illustrator. I'm a graphic designer. We both come out of a big arts community in Boston, but we don't have any of that community looking to participate in anything around Nashua. I just started producing a theater production that's going to go up in Court Street, and I couldn't even find a theater group to sponsor that. I'm working through Great American Downtown, and I'm only doing that because I'm really scrappy, and and we made it work. But all the people that are not as scrappy as me, they are going to, all my peers, they're going to Manchester. They're moving to Manchester, performing there. They're performing in Concord, in Massachusetts, on the seacoast, and there are people like me that could purchase homes. They participate actively in the nightlife, go to the restaurants down here, use all the parks and the facilities, and there's tons of them out there, and they're not here right now. And I think they'd all be interested in music programming, in theater programming, in gallery shows. I mean, I go to gallery shows in Boston, I go in Portsmouth, but I don't go here because they're not here. And so I think on behalf of my community, myself, and Great American Downtown, and everybody who's trying to make theater work in this community, we'd really appreciate more opportunities to do so. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman and committee, hello, or hello again. It's been a while. My name is Liz Richoppe, and I live at 15 Middle Dunstable Road, which is in the south end. I, at one time, was chairing the Nashua Arts Commission when we developed the Art and Culture Plan, which a big centerpiece of it was the Performing Arts Center, and spent a lot of time here at the PEDC talking about that. And it's incredible, really, to see that the conversation is still going on. I really enjoyed listening to the gentleman before me about the pros and cons of what the artist community is seeing. Back in the day, when we were just developing the planning around that and talking about what sequence of events needed to happen, because that's always kind of where we get caught up in our shorts, you know. One of the things we talked about after the structure itself and getting the funding was really what we called a business plan, AKA really the programming of a performing arts center. So I just want to bring that up as something that we shouldn't lose sight of. We need to think about it very quickly because the ball will get rolling, and then we may have a structure with not quite thought out content. You know, what are we going to really do with that building? And I think that there's so much changing, you know, in the arts, you know, even from just a couple of years ago. We really have to pay attention to how are we going to program it. So at the same time, and by the way, I haven't met Tim formally, but I'm glad you came back. So very, very cool to hear what you had to say. And that's what I just want to go on record to say. Let's really pay attention to that as much as we can. And thanks for all the work. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Any other additional remarks by committee members? Okay. We have no need for a non-public session. I will just say Alderman Clements and I, or Alderman McCarthy and I talked about the next meeting, and I think we agreed that we probably won't have a meeting in 2 weeks, August 1st, unless something,
If there is one, neither of us will be there, so.
well,
Neither will I. I'm on vacation.
and we talked, there's the legislation that's been tabled on the historic overlay district. There's nothing time sensitive about that. We're waiting for legal to put that together. And since we don't know whether that's going to be done or not, just to let people know that we're going to cancel PEDC for August 1st. So you can enjoy another evening of the summer. So do I have a motion? Alderman McCarthy?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, motion is to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carried, and we are adjourned at 8:31.